There are pains you carry inside you that if someone asks, "Why are you sad?" you are the one who feels the most confused. There is no personal memory that explains that heaviness, no present experience big enough to create those waves of emotion that rise as if you were carrying an entire century of darkness on your shoulders. Empaths feel this long before they ever learn its name, ancestral pain. A kind of invisible memory passed down through flesh and blood, through silence, through stories that were never fully told. Jung once said that the past does not disappear. It simply waits for a soul sensitive enough to recognize its presence. And in every generation, there is always one whose heart is more sensitive than the rest, someone standing between two worlds, between what has happened and what needs to end. The empath is that person. They do not only feel other people's emotions, they feel the shadowed regions their entire lineage buried in order to survive. They grow up with sorrows that do not belong to them, with tensions no one ever taught them how to name, with a strange sense of responsibility that if they do not care, do not listen, do not heal, everything will collapse. No one told them that most of these things are not theirs. No one told them they were chosen to end a cycle, not continue it. Because in every family, there are repeating patterns: control, silence, blame, sacrifice, violence, narcissism, addiction, disappointment, shame looping through generations like an invisible curse. No one breaks it, because no one is sensitive enough to see it, until an empath appears. You are the one who feels the pain more deeply, because your soul is brighter. You are the one pulled into emotional storms, not to be drowned, but to realize you have the power to transform. You are the last one to carry the wound, not because you are weak, but because you are the only soul strong enough to end it. Here lies the deeper truth. Empaths do not carry karma. They resolve it. They do not repeat the pattern. They break it. They are not swallowed by the lineage. They are the ones who bring light back to where the family lost it. And this journey begins the moment you recognize that the pain inside you is not a sentence. It is an invitation to end a story that has lasted far too long. Part 1. The Soul Paradox. Why empaths are always born into the most wounded families. Nothing in an empath's journey is accidental. Behind the place you were born, the environment you grew up in, and the people you encountered, there is always a subtle orchestration of the unconscious, what Jung called the language of the soul. And the first thing most empaths realize as they mature is this: they are almost never born into peaceful families. Instead, they arrive in families where pain has been suppressed for generations, where silent secrets exist beneath layers of thick quiet, where people learn to survive by hiding emotions rather than confronting them. On the surface, it looks like injustice. Why must the most sensitive one grow up among the most wounded souls? But at a deeper level, the empath's soul understands they chose this. Empaths are souls with thin energetic boundaries, not in the sense of being weak, but in the sense that they can perceive subtle currents of energy that others cannot touch. They feel the unspoken pain, hear the sighs the family has learned to ignore, and detect the cracks in their loved ones' hearts, even when those people are smiling. This is not because empaths are overly emotional, but because they are born with a higher frequency of consciousness, a spiritual psychic mechanism that allows them to read the parts of the collective shadow the family has buried. As children, empaths often sense something wrong in the home long before anyone admits it. They perceive tension before arguments erupt. They feel their mother's sadness even when she doesn't cry. They sense their father's emotional distance even when he fulfills every duty. They grow up like living radars, adjusting themselves to every emotional shift in order to maintain peace, as if their soul knows that if they don't hold the balance, everything might collapse. And then they begin to wonder, why am I the child who detects every storm others create? Why must I feel things that do not belong to me? Jung answered this in a way few expect. Where a shadow has been buried for too long, the soul sends a person of light. In other words, empaths are not thrown into chaotic families. They are summoned, because in every family, repeating patterns exist: generational silence, emotional control, excessive sacrifice, unhealed wounds, violence, narcissism, addiction, shame. When no one faces them, these patterns become a kind of energetic curse, looping from one generation to the next. The empath is the first soul sensitive enough to perceive that pattern, feel it, and most importantly, break it. What sets empaths apart is not the level of pain they endure, but the refusal of their soul to surrender to the darkness the entire family accepted as fate. Empaths stand at the crossroads of two generations. They carry the wounds of the past, but hold the light of the future. They exist on the boundary between what was hidden and what must be seen. This is the deeper reason. Empaths are born into wounded families not because they are weak, but because they are the only souls strong enough to turn pain into awareness, shadow into light, and cycles into closure. You are the last of the old cycle and the first of the new. You are not the family's victim. You are the one the entire lineage has been waiting for. Part 2. The spiritual mechanism, how ancestral pain is transmitted to the empath. Pain is not transmitted only through memories. It is transmitted through energy, through silence, through cellular memory, and through emotional voids the family has long avoided. Each generation carries a portion of the unfinished story of the one before it. And when those chapters remain unresolved, they seek the next generation in order to be completed. This is the deep mechanism behind why empaths feel sorrows that do not belong to them. They are not strangers to these emotions because their soul already carries the unconscious recordings of the entire bloodline. In Jungian psychology, this is what he called the family shadow, the collective of what has not been accepted, not spoken, not faced, yet silently governs the entire system. When a family has a history of abandonment, violence, shame, emotional isolation, or generations of silence, those memories do not disappear. They condense into a heavy emotional field, and that field always seeks a soul sensitive enough to perceive and illuminate it. The empath is that soul. On the biological level, modern science calls this epigenetics. Psychological wounds imprint the DNA, not by altering genes, but by altering how those genes are switched on or off. A person who lived in fear passes down a biological state that makes their descendants react intensely to fear, even without a cause. A person suppressed emotionally passes signals that make their children feel unnamed sadness. This means empaths are not imagining ancestral pain, they literally carry its imprint in their cells. But the deepest layer is not biological, it is energetic. Every family is an energetic organism with emotional rivers that have flowed the same way for generations. When one generation suppresses, the next absorbs. When one person runs, another must confront. When one lifetime refuses to speak truth, the next must feel that truth with intensity strong enough to break the cycle. That is why empaths often feel, I'm not allowed to be myself. I'm living for someone else. I'm carrying something that isn't mine. Is note, these are not illusions. They are the language of the family shadow, searching for someone to bring it to light. On the soul level, empaths possess a special energetic filter. Instead of resisting ancestral pain, they absorb it, feel it fully, as if they themselves lived it. This exhausts them, yet it also allows them to see the root that previous generations could not. And that is the purpose. Empaths are not sent into the world to carry the wound as a burden, but to understand it from within, because only through understanding can they heal it and end it. Ancestral pain flows into the empath, not to break them, but to be released through them. Empaths stand at the final energetic gateway of the lineage, where all unfinished lessons finally come into the light. This is the profound truth. Empaths feel ancestral pain because their soul is designed to let it pass through them and end with them, not repeat, not transmit. You are the one the pain seeks, not to torment you, but because you are the first one capable of freeing it. Part 3. Signs you are carrying ancestral wounds. There are signs that cannot be mistaken, signs an empath soul feels long before the mind can name them. Because ancestral wounds are not memories, they are a silent, energetic current flowing through you, shaping your emotions, your reactions, and even the relationships you are repeatedly drawn into. And the striking truth is that most of this pain did not begin with you. One of the clearest signs is sadness without a personal reason. You may wake up on a beautiful day, yet your heart feels heavy as stone. Nothing has happened, but it feels as though your soul is enduring something far too large to understand. This is the kind of sadness that has existed in your family's energetic field for ages, and you are the first one sensitive enough to feel it. Another sign is deep emotions far beyond your life experiences, as if you are carrying the fear, shame, or loneliness of someone else. You may fear abandonment, even though your parents never abandoned you. You may feel guilt even when you have done nothing wrong. You may react intensely to conflict even though you have never experienced violence. These are not your reactions. These are inherited energetic responses, activated the moment an empath opens the gates of their emotional perception. Another sign is that family patterns appear in your life even when you try to avoid them. For example, you are drawn to people who need healing, to narcissists, to those who crave attention. You become the emotional caretaker for others. You unconsciously play the role of the mediator, the rescuer, or the bearer of burdens. You did not learn this from anyone. This soaked into you like an invisible family language. Then there are deeper signs. You feel as if you are living a life that is not truly yours. You carry expectations, sadness, or emotional weight you never agreed to bear. You feel you must be strong for everyone, calm for those who cannot be calm, mature in place of those who should have protected you. Another hallmark of empaths carrying ancestral wounds is a rootless fear, a fear without an identifiable source, as if your soul was programmed by generations who lived through scarcity, trauma, war, betrayal, or separation. When a family has endured multiple generations of loss, the next generation will live in a state of constant vigilance, even when life is objectively safe. This is a classic ancestral wound, anxiety without cause. Another essential sign many empaths overlook is unusual sensitivity to conflict or negative energy. Others may shrug it off, but you feel as if you've been pierced. This happens because your energy field holds many layers of unresolved emotional memory. When someone is angry, you don't just feel their anger, you feel every unspoken anger buried across generations of your family. There is also a deeper sign, a nameless pain that awakens whenever you face emotional violence or unfair treatment. Not because you are weak, but because it reactivates the wounds of your mother, your grandmother, or someone in your lineage you never met. You are not reacting only for yourself, you are reacting on behalf of the lineage. And finally, the clearest sign of all is this. You always feel like you are the last one in the family who must endure this, as if a silent voice whispers, "If not you, then no one will end this pattern." And strangely, you know it is true. This is the calling of the empath's soul, the call of the final light bearer who comes to close the door on a generational curse. Part 4. The true nature of a bloodline curse and why it exists. A bloodline curse is not magic or punishment from the universe. It is an energetic and psychological pattern passed through generations when pain is not faced, not acknowledged, and not healed. Jung called this the collective shadow of the lineage, the unconscious domain where repressed memories, Shameful moments, hidden secrets, and forbidden emotions accumulate like sediment. When a wound is not confronted, it does not disappear. It simply seeks the next person to carry it. And when generation after generation chooses avoidance, suppression, or silence, the pattern becomes a loop, an invisible curse. At its core, a bloodline curse arises from three primary sources. One, unprocessed pain, betrayal, loss, humiliation, poverty, war, violence, abandonment. Major events that were never spoken about settle into the family's energy field. A person betrayed but silent passes down fear of intimacy. A person who lived through scarcity passes insecurity to their grandchildren. Someone who was controlled leaves behind patterns of submission for future generations. 2. Repeating psychological roles. The victim, the rescuer, the controller, the silent one, the martyr, the bearer of guilt. When a family becomes accustomed to these roles, the next generation unconsciously steps into the same roles as if destiny demands it. A controlled mother raises a submissive daughter. The daughter unconsciously chooses a controlling partner. That child repeats the cycle unless someone breaks it. This is not punitive karma. It is the karma of unconscious repetition. 3. Unspoken vows, silent rules. The family never states, but everyone follows. Don't be weak. Don't talk about painful things. Don't disappoint anyone. Don't outgrow your parents. Don't break tradition. Well, and worse, women in this family must always endure. Men in this family never stay. These silent vows are more powerful than any spoken teaching. They anchor the family's energy to a rigid pattern. These vows create the curse. When a pattern repeats across enough generations, it becomes the family's energetic program, like software embedded into the lineage's information field. And when a child is born, they inherit not just genes, but the energetic program of the ancestors. This is why empaths, the most sensitive ones, feel it the strongest. They do not only feel their own pain, they feel the heaviness of previous lives, the exhaustion of the dead, the fear of those who lived without safety. That energy is not theirs, yet it lives in them like an unconscious inheritance. And a bloodline curse remains until someone finally looks at it. Someone who dares to feel what their parents could not feel. Someone who dares to say what their grandparents could not say. Someone who refuses to play the roles the lineage has followed for centuries. Someone who chooses a different path. That person is the empath. And when the empath does what previous generations could not face it, understand it, and transform it, the curse ends. Because shadow exists only where no one looks, and the moment the empath opens their eyes, the multi-generational loop dissolves. Part 5. The moment of awakening, when the empath realizes this pain is not mine. There is a moment in empath's journey that no one teaches them, yet their soul recognizes suddenly and violently. The moment they understand that most of the pain that has tormented them their entire life never belonged to them. It is a spiritual shock, an inner cracking that changes the entire way they see the world. It doesn't come through a story or through someone's explanation. It arrives as a raw truth, pushed up from the unconscious, the moment the empath is mature enough to see it. In that moment, the empath begins to see the emotional layers clearly. There are fears in them that carry their mother's voice, anxieties with the breathing rhythm of their grandmother, overreactions that echo like the cries of generations who lived in instability. They recognize that the guilt they carry didn't arise from their own actions, but from a lineage haunted by shame. They recognize that their insecurity is not a personal flaw, but the memory of generations who lived, never knowing what tomorrow would bring. They realize that their lifelong urge to save others isn't because they are too kind, but because from childhood they were playing the healer for broken adults. And that truth shakes the soul. Because when an empath understands that the pain was never theirs, they simultaneously understand that they no longer have to carry it. That moment is like standing before the first mirror of their life, where they finally see the distinction between me and inheritance. This is the meeting point between inherited shadow and the light of consciousness. Jung called it the encounter between the ancestral unconscious and the awakening self. When the light of awareness touches that region of darkness, something strange happens. The empath does not collapse. They awaken. They realize they have spent years reacting through patterns not their own, fearing with the reflexes of their ancestors, loving through the hunger of those who lacked, enduring with the habits of people who were wounded and silenced. And then they understand they have the right to stop, the right not to continue, the right to choose differently. This moment creates the first fracture in the family's energetic genetic matrix, because when the empath whispers within themselves, "This is not mine," they separate themselves from the field of suffering their ancestors dissolved into. From this point, the empath enters their own nigredo, the stage of dismantling the old, taking apart the invisible burdens, and returning the emotions that never belonged to them. What's interesting is that this awakening does not make the empath colder. On the contrary, it makes them more authentic, brighter, closer to their original soul. Because for the first time, they are able to feel their own pain, not the pain of an entire lineage. For the first time, they can live their own life, not the continuation of a story that began long before they were born. That moment, the moment the empath realizes they are not a container for ancestral pain, is the turning point that leads them into the path of dissolving the bloodline curse. From here, they are no longer dissolved in shadow, they begin to transform it. Part 6. The Liberation Journey. How the empath ends the bloodline curse. When an empath awakens and realizes that most of the pain within them is not theirs, that is only the beginning of the liberation journey. The hardest and most sacred part is the dissolution process, where they must alter an entire stream of energy that has existed for generations. The first thing they do, whether consciously or unconsciously, is look directly at the truth. The empath becomes the first one who dares to name what the family has avoided, sometimes for centuries. They no longer fear the truth because they understand that pretending not to see is what breaks them. When they face the pain, they break the avoidance mechanism that sustained the bloodline curse. That is the moment light pierces shadow. The next thing the empath does is stop continuing the old pattern. They break the cycle of unconscious submission, break the role of the healer for everyone, break the expectation that they must carry the emotional burdens of the entire family. They say no sometimes for the first time in the entire lineage. And with each no, another layer of the old family energy collapses. This is the sacred boundary Jung referred to as individuation, the separation from the family persona in order to become the authentic self. Another crucial step is reviving the inner child, the part of the soul buried in childhood because it had to carry too much. The empath begins healing themselves, allowing themselves to feel, cry, be sad, be angry in their own way. They give back the emotional responsibilities that were never theirs to hold. When they do this, their soul retrieves the fragments of energy that were absorbed into the ancestral pattern. This is how they reclaim their power. Next, the empath enters the deepest phase, facing the ancestral shadow, not with resentment, but with understanding. They recognize that those who came before were not evil, they were wounded. They unconsciously passed down pain because they had no tools to heal. And when the empath sees this, judgment dissolves, replaced by a form of awakened love. A love that is neither enabling nor self-sacrificial, yet not hateful. This is what Jung called the mature light, a light that does not blind, but glows through understanding. Finally, the empath performs the most symbolic act of all. They choose an entirely different path. They become the first in the family to stop enduring, to stop imprisoning emotions in silence, to stop repeating unsafe patterns of love, to stop carrying everything. They choose freedom instead of emotional debt. They choose truth instead of pretending to be okay. They choose essence instead of performance. And that choice, brave beyond measure, becomes the line that ends the bloodline curse. Because a curse lives only when the pattern continues. And when the empath declares, "From me onward, this story ends," the old energy has nothing left to cling to. The multi-generational loop stops with them. This is the deepest act a soul can offer to its lineage, to become the first one who chooses the light. Part 7. The Light of Resurrection. When the empath ends the curse, the entire lineage is freed. When an empath breaks a bloodline curse, the transformation does not stop with them. It ripples backward into the past and outward into the future, like waves of energy redirecting the entire lineage. This is what spirituality calls healing backwards and forwards, and what Jung described as the liberating effect of individual consciousness on the collective unconscious. Because once one person in a system becomes conscious, the unconscious of that system is forced to shift. This happens in silence, but carries more power than any spoken word. When the empath ends a pattern, that pattern loses one more successor. When they choose to love in a healthy way, they suddenly become the first model of secure love in the family. When they set boundaries, the younger generation sees that no one has to lose themselves in order to be loved. And when they heal their inner child, they open a new door for the children growing up in the lineage, allowing them to live free of the burdens the empath once carried. Something strange happens after an empath awakens. The people around them, even indirectly, begin to change. The mother may feel less burdened. The father may soften after years of silence. Siblings begin to look inward, not because the empath asked them to change, but because when one link in the system shifts frequency, the system reorganizes itself. Light does not need to convince. It only needs to be present. The empath also brings healing in ways they do not realize. By ending old patterns, they free the generations who have passed. The ancestors who were wounded, who were never allowed to cry, who were trapped in circumstances they could not escape. They receive liberation when the empath finally acknowledges the pain they never had the chance to resolve. This is the concept of ancestral redemption. The empath is not only healing themselves, they are completing the unfinished chapters of those who came before. This brings peace to the entire energetic field of the lineage. And there is something even deeper. When the empath steps out of the darkness, the future generations are born into a lighter energetic field. The children, nieces, nephews, sons, daughters become calmer, less prone to irrational fear, less burdened by shame or responsibilities that are not theirs. This is not coincidence. It is the result of a soul cleansing the dense energetic residue left by previous generations. When an empath breaks the curse, they return to the younger ones, the right to live their own lives, not the continuation of an old story. And finally, a strange but undeniable truth appears. The empath's light eventually returns to them like a universal echo. They begin to feel relief without reason, peace without condition, healthier relationships arriving naturally, opportunities opening, intuition sharpening, and a kind of freedom they have never known. Because when they free the lineage from darkness, they simultaneously free themselves from chains they never understood. This is the empath's soul reward. After walking through the shadow of many lifetimes, they become the light of their own existence. When an empath completes their journey from carrying unnamed wounds to recognizing their true origin, to standing up and breaking centuries-old patterns, they do not heal only themselves. They become the turning point of their entire lineage, the first to sense the ancestral shadow and the first to walk beyond it. Jung said that the consciousness of one individual can alter the fate of a collective, and the empath is the clearest proof of this. Because they dare to do what past generations never did. They confront. They dare to ask where others stayed silent, dare to cry where others suppressed, dare to speak truth where others hid, dare to choose freedom where others repeated the same cycle. And this courage turns them into a bridge between lost souls and unborn souls, returning old pain to where it belongs and opening a new chapter for the entire lineage. The truth is, an empath was never born to carry everything. They were born to free everything. Not to continue the old story, but to close it. Not to pay the price, but to end the price. Not to escape the darkness, but to bring light into the place darkness once ruled. And when the empath does this, when they break the cycle, dissolve the unconscious vows, and step out of roles that never belonged to them, they not only reclaim their own soul, they hand the next generation a future that is cleaner, lighter, and brighter. In the end, the empath discovers the truth they were always searching for. They were never cursed, they were chosen. Not because they were strong from the beginning, but because they were the only soul willing to become strong. Not because they felt no fear, but because they were the only one willing to walk into the place where others turned away. And at the end of this journey, the empath awakens with a new realization. They are no longer the bearer of the family's pain. They are the one who rewrites its destiny. And from that moment on, they no longer live the story of the generations before them. They begin to live their own story.